They say an alpha's word is law, carved in stone and sealed in blood. But what happens when that word destroys the only soul who ever saw past the monster? Tonight, I'm taking you into the frozen heart of the Northern Moon Empire, where the most powerful king in wolf history made one choice that would haunt him forever. He had everything: absolute power, a kingdom that trembled at his name, and a Luna who loved him despite the darkness crawling under his skin. Then he threw it all away because he believed a lie. Stay with me until the end of this story. You'll see how pride doesn't just break a man, it buries him alive. Drop a like if you're ready for this, and comment your city so I know my pack is listening. The throne room of Shadow Peak Fortress stank of old blood and fear. Kaelor Draven sat on the obsidian throne like a predator that had forgotten how to rest, his massive frame rigid, his silver eyes cold as the winter moon hanging outside the frost-covered windows. Every wolf in the Northern Moon Empire knew those eyes. They were the last thing traitors saw before their throats were ripped out. Kaelor didn't just rule the North, he owned it, body and soul. 50 packs bowed to his name. Alphas twice his age dropped their gaze when he walked past. The bloodline ran pure through his veins, ancient and unbroken, the kind of power that made the earth itself submit. He'd killed his first challenger at 15. By 20, he'd united the Northern Territories under one banner through sheer brutality and strategic genius. Now, at 32, he was untouchable. Or so he thought. Selene Vale stood at the far end of the hall, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant, and she still carried herself like royalty, spine straight, chin lifted. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her green eyes, those damn eyes, held a warmth that didn't belong in a place like this. She was the only wolf in the Empire who looked at Kaelor and saw something other than a weapon. He'd claimed her 3 years ago during the Lunar Summit, a gathering of the most powerful packs on the continent. She'd been standing in a garden, arguing with an elder about territory rights, and when she'd turned those eyes on him, something inside Kaelor's chest had cracked open. It wasn't love. Not then. Alphas like him didn't do love, but it was something close, something dangerous. He'd marked her that same night, sinking his teeth into her throat while she gasped his name, and when the bond snapped into place, Kaelor felt it like a chain wrapping around his ribs. Unbreakable. Permanent. For 3 years, Selene had been his Luna, his queen. The only creature alive who could walk into his war room and tell him he was being an idiot without getting her throat torn out. But now, standing in that throne room with his entire court watching, Kaelor felt something else entirely. Rage. Lady Nyra stood beside the throne, her crimson dress clinging to her curves, her pale fingers resting on the armrest like she belonged there. She'd been his lover before Selene, a fiery she-wolf from the Eastern Ridge Pack, with a taste for power and a body that knew how to wield it. When Kaelor had taken Selene as his Luna, Nyra had smiled and bowed and played the part of the gracious former mistress. But that smile had always been poison. Nyra leaned close now, her breath warm against Kaelor's ear. "Your Luna's child carries another wolf's scent, my king. The entire court can smell it." Kaelor's claws dug into the armrests, splintering the stone. He'd been noticing things, small things, the way Selene had grown distant over the past few months, the way she flinched when he touched her belly, the way she'd started spending time with Counselor Theron, an older wolf with kind eyes and a reputation for loyalty. Nyra had been whispering for weeks now, planting seeds, leaving evidence in places Kaelor would find it, a scarf that smelled like Theron in Selene's chambers, a letter, unsigned, speaking of secret meetings. And then, 2 nights ago, Nyra had brought him a witness, a servant girl who swore she'd seen Selene and Theron alone in the garden, their heads close together, their hands touching. Kaelor had wanted to rip the girl's lying tongue out, but the doubt had already taken root. Now, standing before the entire High Council, Nyra's voice rang out clear and sharp. "My king, the bloodline must remain pure. If this child does not carry your scent, then the Luna has betrayed the crown. By ancient law, she must be cast out." Selene's face went white. "Kaelor," she said quietly, "you can't believe this." He didn't look at her. Couldn't. Because if he did, he might see the truth, and the truth terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. An alpha's pride was everything. It was the foundation of his power, the reason wolves followed him into battle. If word spread that his own Luna had made him a fool, that another wolf's bastard would sit on his throne, the empire would crumble, packs would revolt, challengers would rise. He couldn't allow it. Kaelor rose from the throne, his voice like grinding stone. "Present the evidence." Nira's smile widened. She gestured, and 2 guards stepped forward, carrying a wooden chest. Inside were the items Nyra had carefully planted over the past months. The scarf, the letters, a silver pendant that Theron had supposedly given Selene as a token of affection. Lies. All of it. But Kaelor's vision had gone red. He turned to Selene, and for the first time since he'd claimed her, he let the bond between them go cold. "Explain this." Her hands trembled over her belly. "Those aren't mine. Kaelor, you know me. You know I would never—" Theron was dragged into the hall, his wrists bound in iron chains. The older wolf's face was bruised, blood trickling from his mouth. He looked at Selene with desperate, pleading eyes. "Tell him," Theron rasped. "Tell him the truth." But before Selene could speak, Nyra's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The child doesn't carry the royal scent, my king. Every wolf here can confirm it." A murmur rippled through the court. Kaelor's enhanced senses flared, searching for the truth, but all he could smell was his own fury and the sickly sweet perfume Nyra always wore, clouding his judgment. Selene stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Kaelor, please, look at me. You know this is a lie. You know what we have—" "What we had," he snarled, and the words felt like broken glass in his throat. Her eyes filled with tears. "You're really going to do this? You're going to throw away everything because she whispered poison in your ear?" Kaelor's fists clenched. "An alpha doesn't tolerate betrayal. I didn't betray you. Then why does the evidence say otherwise? Because it's fake. She's manipulating you. She's always hated me." Nira's face remained perfectly calm, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "My king, if the Luna is innocent, let her present proof. Let her swear before the moon goddess that the child is yours." Selene's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to her belly, and for a moment Kaelor saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, not shame. Fear. "She's afraid of me," he realized. And that realization should have stopped him cold, should have made him question everything. But pride was a cancer, and it had already spread too deep. Kaelor's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "I, Kaelor Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Moon Empire, hereby reject you, Selene Vale, as my Luna and mate." The bond between them snapped like a bone breaking. Selene screamed. It wasn't a sound a wolf should make. It was raw and animal, and full of a pain so deep it made even the hardest warriors in the room flinch. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest, gasping for air as the mate bond tore itself apart inside her soul. Kaelor felt it too. Felt something vital rip away, leaving a gaping wound in his chest that bled ice-cold fury. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. "You and your bastard child are banished from this empire," he said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "If you ever set foot in my territory again, I will kill you myself." Selene looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, her green eyes filled with a grief so profound it should have shattered him. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "One day you'll know the truth, and it will destroy you." Then she was dragged from the hall, her cries echoing long after the doors slammed shut. Nyra's hand found Kaelor's shoulder, her touch light and poisonous. "You did the right thing, my king. The bloodline is protected." Kaelor said nothing. He sat back down on the throne and stared at the empty space where Selene had been standing. And for the first time in his life, the Alpha King felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel before. Doubt. The storm hit 3 hours after Selene was cast out. Not a normal storm. This was the kind of weather that made old wolves mutter prayers and young ones hide in their dens. The wind screamed like a wounded beast, tearing shutters off windows and ripping branches from ancient trees. Snow fell in blinding sheets, turning the world into a white void. Selene stumbled through the drifts, her arms wrapped around her belly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd been given nothing. No supplies. No guards. No mercy. Just the clothes on her back and the child growing inside her. The cold bit through her thin dress, sinking teeth into her skin. Her feet were numb. Her fingers had lost all feeling an hour ago. But she kept walking, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant her son would die too. She could feel him moving inside her, restless and strong. The bond between mother and child pulsed with a warmth that kept her going even as her body screamed for rest. "You're going to live," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I don't care what I have to do. You're going to live." The forest around her was silent except for the wind. No birds. No animals. Just the endless white and the growing certainty that she wasn't going to make it through the night. Then she heard voices. Rough, low, full of malice. Celine's heart seized. She ducked behind a tree, pressing her back against the bark, forcing her breathing to slow. Through the snow she could make out shapes. 4 wolves. Rogues by the smell of them. Exiled criminals who survived by preying on the weak. And she was very, very weak right now. One of them laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Smell that? Fresh meat." "Female," another growled. "Pregnant. Even better. We can have some fun before we kill her." Celine's hand moved to the small knife tucked into her belt. It was barely more than a letter opener, a pitiful weapon against 4 full-grown wolves. But it was all she had. She waited until they were close, until she could see the hunger in their eyes. Then she moved. The blade sank into the first rogue's throat before he even registered she was there. Blood sprayed hot across the snow, and his scream died in a wet gurgle. The other 3 lunged, but Celine was already spinning, her movements fueled by pure maternal fury. She'd been trained as a Luna, knew how to fight, but pregnancy had slowed her, weakened her, and these wolves were desperate and vicious. Claws raked across her shoulder, teeth snapped at her throat. She ducked, stabbed, kicked, fought like an animal backed into a corner. One rogue went down with her knife buried in his eye. Another stumbled back, clutching his ruined face, but the 4th one caught her from behind. His arm locked around her throat, squeezing, cutting off her air. Celine thrashed, her vision going black at the edges, her lungs burning. Her hand scrabbled uselessly at his arm, her strength fading fast. "This is it," she thought. "This is how I die." Then the rogue's grip went slack. Celine collapsed into the snow, gasping, and when she looked up, she saw him. An old wolf, grizzled and scarred with silver fur and eyes that had seen too many winters. He stood over the rogue's corpse, blood dripping from his claws, his expression grim. "You shouldn't be out here, girl," he said. "Not in your condition." Celine coughed, her throat raw. Didn't have a choice. The old wolf studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed and held out a hand. "Come on, there's a cabin half a mile west. You'll freeze if you stay out here." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I'm too damn old to let a pregnant she-wolf die in the snow," he muttered. "Now move before I change my mind." Celine took his hand. Kiss. The cabin was small and drafty, but it had a fire and 4 walls, which made it a palace compared to the frozen hell outside. The old wolf's name was Garrick, and he'd been a soldier once, back before Kaylor's father had ruled the north. Now he lived alone, hunting and trapping, staying far away from pack politics. He didn't ask questions, just wrapped Celine in furs, heated water over the fire, and made her drink broth that tasted like dirt but warmed her from the inside out. "You're the Luna," he said finally, his voice flat. "Saw you once, years ago, at a summit. You were wearing silver." Celine stared into the fire. "Not anymore." Garrick grunted. "Heard the Alpha rejected you. Whole empire's talking about it." "Let them talk. They're also saying the child isn't his." Celine's jaw tightened. "They're wrong." Garrick's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? Because if you're lying, and that child really is a bastard." "He's Kaylor's son," she said quietly, "and he's going to be the most powerful alpha this empire has ever seen." The old wolf stared at her for a long time. Then he laughed, a rough, bitter sound. "Well then, looks like your mate just made the biggest mistake of his life." Celine touched her belly, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat inside. "He'll realize it," she whispered. "One day, he'll know the truth. But by then, it would be far too late." Back at Shadow Peak Fortress, Kaylor stood alone in his chambers, staring at the bed he'd shared with Celine for 3 years. Her scent still lingered on the pillows, faint but unmistakable, and it made something twist violently in his chest. He'd done the right thing. He knew he had. So why did it feel like he'd just ripped out his own heart? A knock sounded at the door. Nira entered without waiting for permission, her hips swaying, her smile warm and familiar. "You look troubled, my king." Kaylor didn't turn around. "Leave me." Her smile faltered. "I only want to comfort you. I know this was difficult." I said leave. For a moment, something dark flickered across Nira's face. Then she bowed and slipped back out into the hallway. Alone again, Kaylor closed his eyes and tried to ignore the gnawing certainty growing in his gut. The certainty that he'd just made a mistake he could never undo. And somewhere in the frozen borderlands, wrapped in furs and clinging to life, Celine Vale held her son and made a silent vow. They would survive. They would grow strong. And one day, the Empire would know the truth. But the question that would haunt the Northern Moon Empire for years to come was this: would the truth come in time to save them or destroy them all? 3 weeks after the rejection, Celine woke to blood. Not a lot. Just enough to soak through her dress and stain the rough blankets Garrick had given her. Just enough to make her heart stop cold in her chest. The old wolf found her sitting on the edge of the cot, staring at her trembling hands, her face white as the snow outside. "How much?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her throat had locked up tight, terror flooding every nerve. Garrick knelt beside her, his scarred hand surprisingly gentle as he examined her. His expression gave nothing away, but Celine had been around wolves long enough to read the tension in his shoulders. "The child's still alive," he said finally, "heartbeat strong. But your body's under too much stress. You need rest, real rest, and food that isn't just broth and dried meat." Celine's laugh came out broken. "In case you haven't noticed, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no healer, no midwife, nothing. Then you better start taking care of yourself, girl, because that boy in your belly is fighting to stay alive, and the least you can do is fight with him." The words hit harder than a slap. Celine wiped her eyes roughly, forcing herself to breathe through the panic. "You're right. I know you're right. Good. Now lie down before you pass out." She obeyed, sinking back into the furs, and pressed both hands over her swollen belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and something fierce bloomed in Celine's chest. Her son would live, no matter what it cost her, no matter what she had to become. Back at Shadow Peak Fortress, the Empire was fracturing. Kaylor stood in the war room, surrounded by maps and reports, all of them screaming the same message. The northern territories were falling apart. 2 packs had refused to send tribute. Another had openly challenged his authority, claiming the Alpha King had lost the moon goddess's favor when he cast out his Luna. Sacred wolves that had guarded the capital for generations had vanished into the wilderness, abandoning their posts without explanation. And every night, Kaylor dreamed of green eyes and a scream that wouldn't stop echoing. Commander Voss stood across the table, his jaw tight. "My king, if we don't address the rebellion in the Western Ridge, we'll lose the entire territory by spring." Kaylor's claws scraped against the wood. "Send a battalion. Make an example of the leaders. That's the 4th battalion we've deployed in 2 weeks. Our forces are stretched thin, then stretch them thinner." Voss hesitated. "Permission to speak freely?" "Denied." The words came anyway. "The packs are questioning your judgment. They're saying the rejection of your Luna has cursed the bloodline." Kaylor's head snapped up, his eyes blazing silver. "Say that again." Voss held his ground, though his pulse was hammering loud enough for Kaylor to hear. "I'm just repeating what I've heard, my king. The elders believe—" "I don't care what the elders believe. The Luna betrayed me. The child wasn't mine. End of discussion." Was it, though? The question came from the doorway. Kaylor turned to find Theron standing there, flanked by 2 guards. The older wolf looked like hell. His face was still bruised from the beating he'd taken during the trial, and his wrists bore deep scars from the iron chains, but his eyes were clear and defiant. Kaylor's voice dropped to a growl. "You should be in a cell." "I was, until your guards realized they had no actual evidence to hold me on." Theron stepped into the room, moving slowly, carefully. "You want to kill me? Go ahead. But before you do, answer one question. Did you ever actually look at the evidence Nira gave you, or did you just take her word for it?" Every muscle in Kaylor's body went rigid. "Get out. The scarf she claimed was mine? I've never owned anything that color." The letters? Not my handwriting. The pendant? I've never seen it before in my life. Lies. Prove it. Theron's voice was steady, relentless. Bring in a scribe. Compare the handwriting. Test the scent on that scarf. Do one single thing to verify the evidence instead of just accepting it, because it confirmed what you were already afraid of. Kaylor crossed the room in 2 strides and slammed Theron against the wall, hard enough to crack stone. His forearm pressed into the older wolf's throat, cutting off air. You dare question me? Theron's face was turning red, but he forced the words out anyway. Someone has to, because you're so blinded by pride that you can't see you've been played. Kaylor's grip tightened. One more word and I'll rip your throat out. Do it. At least then I won't have to watch you destroy everything Celine tried to build. For a long, terrible moment, Kaylor's claws pressed into Theron's neck, drawing blood. His wolf was howling for violence, demanding he finish this, silence the doubt before it could spread. But something in Theron's eyes stopped him. Not fear, not submission, pity. Kaylor released him and stepped back, breathing hard. Get him out of my sight. The guards dragged Theron away, but his words lingered like poison in an open wound. Did you ever actually look at the evidence? Kaylor turned back to the maps, but the borders and territories blurred together. His head was pounding. The bond scar where Celine had been ripped away throbbed with a constant, aching emptiness. Voss cleared his throat carefully. My king, there's one more thing. We've received reports of increased rogue activity near the eastern border. Travelers are going missing. Entire camps wiped out overnight. Deal with it. Sir, the attacks are coordinated, organized, someone's leading them. Then find whoever it is and bring me their head. Voss bowed and left, taking the other commanders with him. Alone in the war room, Kaylor braced his hands on the table and closed his eyes. The Empire was crumbling. His authority was being questioned. Sacred bonds were breaking, and all he could think about was the way Celine had looked at him in that throne room, the way her voice had cracked when she'd begged him to listen. You'll regret this. One day you'll know the truth, and it will destroy you. His fist slammed into the table, splintering wood. She'd been lying. She had to have been lying. Because if she wasn't, then everything Kaylor had built his life on was a house of cards, and he'd just set it on fire himself. Doquet. Nira found him an hour later, standing at the window overlooking the courtyard where Celine used to walk every morning. You're brooding again, she said softly, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. It's not good for you. Kaylor didn't move, didn't respond. Nira's lips brushed his shoulder. I know this has been hard, but you did what was necessary. The bloodline had to be protected. Theron says the evidence was fabricated. Her body went still for just a fraction of a second. Then she laughed, light and dismissive. Of course he'd say that. He was probably in on it with her. Was he? Nira pulled back, her brow furrowing in concern. Kaylor, you can't seriously be doubting this now. You saw the proof. You smelled the lies on her. Did I? Or did I smell what you wanted me to smell? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nira's eyes flashed, something dark and dangerous moving behind them before she smoothed it away. I would never manipulate you, she said quietly. Everything I've done has been to protect you, to protect the Empire. Kaylor turned to face her fully. Then you won't mind if I have the evidence re-examined, independently. Nira's smile didn't waver, but her nails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Of course not. I have nothing to hide. Good. Then we'll start tomorrow. She kissed his cheek and left, her footsteps measured and calm. But the moment the door closed behind her, Nira's mask cracked. Her hands shook, her breathing turned shallow and rapid. He was starting to question, starting to dig. And if he dug deep enough, he'd find the bodies she'd buried, the witnesses she'd paid off, the servants she'd threatened, the entire web of lies she'd spent months weaving. Nira pulled a small vial from her dress. Inside, a dark liquid swirled like smoke. Poison, strong enough to kill an alpha in his sleep. She'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. Had hoped Kaylor would simply move on, take her as his new Luna, and forget about the worthless she-wolf he'd cast out. But if he was going to be difficult about it, well. Nira had survived this long by being ruthless, by doing whatever it took to get what she wanted. And what she wanted was the throne, even if she had to kill a king to get it. In the borderlands, Celine's labor started on the coldest night of the year. It began with a tightening in her belly, sharp and sudden, that made her gasp and clutch the edge of the cot. Garrick looked up from the fire, his eyes narrowing. "How far apart?" Celine gritted her teeth through another contraction. "I don't know. They just started." "Wonderful." The old wolf moved quickly, gathering supplies, boiled water, clean cloth, a knife that he heated in the flames until it glowed red. "This is too early," Celine panted. "He's not supposed to come for another 3 weeks." Babies don't care about schedules. Garrick's hands were steady despite his age. "You just focus on breathing. I'll handle the rest." But as the hours crawled past and the contractions grew stronger, it became clear this wasn't going to be simple. The baby was breech, feet first instead of head first. And Celine's body, weakened by stress and malnutrition and the brutal rejection of the mate bond, was struggling to push him out. Blood soaked the blankets. Too much blood. Garrick's jaw was set, his movements precise and controlled, but Celine could see the worry in his eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered, her vision blurring. "I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was iron and fire. "You're a Luna. You don't get to quit." "I'm not a Luna anymore." "Then be a mother. Because that boy needs you to fight." Another contraction ripped through her, and Celine screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and primal, echoing off the cabin walls. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She'd spent weeks mourning, grieving the life she'd lost, the mate who'd abandoned her, the empire that had cast her out. But her son didn't care about any of that. He was fighting to be born, clawing his way into a world that already wanted him dead, and he needed her to be strong. So Celine stopped mourning and started fighting. She bore down with everything she had, her nails digging into the wooden frame of the cot, her teeth bared in a snarl that would have made any alpha proud. Blood and sweat and pain blurred together into one endless battle. And then, finally, after hours that felt like years, Garrick pulled a tiny wailing baby from between her legs and held him up to the firelight. "It's a boy," the old wolf said, his voice rough with something that might have been awe. Celine reached for her son with trembling hands, and when Garrick placed him on her chest, still covered in blood and vernix, she felt something lock into place inside her soul. The baby's eyes opened. Silver, bright as moonlight, and on his tiny shoulder, clear as day, was a mark. The royal crest. 3 wolves circling a crescent moon. The same mark Kaelor bore. The same mark every true-blooded heir to the northern throne had carried for 1,000 years. Garrick stared at it, his expression unreadable. "Well, I'll be damned." Celine's tears fell onto her son's face as she cradled him close. "His name is Lucien Draven, the future king," Garrick muttered. Hidden in a frozen shack at the edge of nowhere. Celine's arms tightened around her baby. Not forever. One day, the Empire will know who he is. One day, they'll see the truth. And Kaelor? Her expression hardened. One day, he'll have to look his son in the eyes and explain why he wasn't there. The assassins came 2 nights later. Celine woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking wood. Her body was still weak, still bleeding, but instinct took over. She grabbed Lucien from his makeshift cradle and rolled off the cot just as an arrow punched through the wall where her head had been. Garrick was already moving, his old body suddenly deadly. He caught the first assassin in the throat with a thrown knife, dropping him before he'd made it 3 steps into the cabin. But there were more. At least 5. Maybe more outside. "Go!" Garrick barked. "Back window, now!" Celine didn't argue. She wrapped Lucien in furs and ran, her bare feet slipping on icy floorboards. Behind her, she heard the sounds of fighting, Garrick's snarl, the meaty thud of fists on flesh. A scream cut short. She hit the window and smashed through it, glass cutting her arms, cold air slamming into her lungs. Lucien wailed, and Celine pressed him to her chest, muffling the sound as best she could. The forest was dark. No moon, just shadows and snow and the certainty that death was hunting her. Footsteps crunched behind her, close, too close. Celine ran. Her body screamed in protest. Every step sent fire through her torn muscles. Blood trickled down her thighs, leaving a trail in the snow. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. A hand grabbed her hair and yanked her backward. Celine twisted, lashing out with her elbow. It connected with something soft, and the grip loosened. She spun, still clutching Lucien, and drove her knee into the assassin's groin. He went down and she kept running, but there were more. Shadows peeling away from trees, closing in. She was surrounded. The lead assassin stepped forward, his face hidden behind a black mask. His voice was flat, professional. Nothing personal, Luna, just business. Celine's back hit a tree. There was nowhere left to run. Who sent you? The assassin tilted his head. Does it matter? Yes, he shrugged. Lady Naira sends her regards. Of course. Naira couldn't risk Kaylor finding out the truth, couldn't risk the real heir surviving to claim his birthright. So she'd sent killers to finish what the rejection had started. The assassin raised his blade. Celine looked down at Lucien. Her son stared back at her with those impossible silver eyes, so much like his father's it made her heart crack all over again. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. Then a howl split the night. Not a normal howl. This was deeper, older. The kind of sound that made the earth itself tremble. The assassins froze, their heads whipping toward the darkness. And from the shadows came wolves. Not rogues, not soldiers, sacred wolves. The ancient guardians who'd abandoned Shadow Peak when Kaylor rejected his Luna. The lead wolf was massive, his fur silver white, his eyes burning gold. He stepped between Celine and the assassins, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth like daggers. The Luna and Heir are under our protection now, he growled. Leave or die. The assassins looked at each other, then they ran. Smart choice. Celine sagged against the tree, her legs finally giving out. The sacred wolf approached slowly, lowering his huge head until his muzzle was level with Lucien. He sniffed the baby carefully. Then his tail wagged once. The bloodline holds true, he rumbled. This child carries the old power. The power his father has forgotten. Celine's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you helping us? Because the moon goddess does not abandon her chosen, even when they are cast out by fools. Is Garrick alive? Wounded, but alive. My pack will tend to him. The wolf's golden eyes fixed on Celine with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You must leave these lands, Luna. Naira will send more assassins, and next time we may not arrive in time. Where do I go? South, to the Crescent Forest. There are allies there who still remember the old ways. They will shelter you and the heir until he is strong enough to reclaim his birthright. Celine looked down at Lucien, sleeping peacefully now, despite the chaos around him. And Kaylor? The sacred wolf's expression darkened. The Alpha King has made his choice. Now he must live with it. But know this, Luna, the Empire is dying, the bloodline is fading, and only your son can save it now. Then my son will save it. Celine's voice was steel wrapped in silk. And when he does, Kaylor will have to kneel before the child he cast out and beg forgiveness. The wolf's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. Perhaps. Or perhaps by then, there will be nothing left to save. Vashkan. 300 miles north in the depths of Shadow Peak Fortress, Kaylor woke to his chambers filled with smoke. He rolled out of bed, his reflexes taking over, his mind still foggy with sleep. Fire. There was fire somewhere. He could smell it, taste it. But when he searched the room, there was nothing. No flames, no smoke. Just the acrid scent burning his nostrils from the inside. Then he saw it, the wine glass on his bedside table. Still half full. And at the bottom, a dark residue that didn't belong. Poison. His wolf senses flared, analyzing the scent, breaking it down. Nightshade. Bloodroot. And something else, something rare and deadly that only grew in the eastern ridge. Nira's homeland. Kaylor's blood went ice cold. The door burst open. Commander Voss rushed in, his sword drawn, his face pale. My king, are you... Fine. Kaylor's voice was deadly calm. Lock down the fortress. No one leaves. No one enters. Sir, do it. Now. Voss ran. Kaylor stood alone in his chambers, staring at the poisoned wine, and felt the last pieces of his carefully constructed reality crumble to dust. Nira had tried to kill him, which meant everything else she'd told him was a lie too. The evidence, the affair, The bastard child. All of it. Lies. And Celine. His chest constricted so violently he thought his ribs would crack. Celine had been telling the truth, had been innocent, had been carrying his son, and he'd cast her out into a frozen wasteland to die. Kaylor's hands started shaking, then his entire body. A sound ripped from his throat, raw and broken, somewhere between a roar and a scream. He'd destroyed her. Destroyed them. Destroyed everything that mattered because he'd been too proud, too stubborn, too afraid to question the narrative that confirmed his worst fears. The door opened again. Naira stood there, her face concerned, her voice soft. "Kaylor?" I heard shouting. "What's—" She saw the wine glass, saw his face, and ran. Kaylor was faster. He caught her in the hallway, slammed her against the wall hard enough to leave cracks in the stone. His hand wrapped around her throat, claws extending, drawing blood. "You poisoned me." Naira's eyes were wide, terrified, but there was something else there too. Defiance, rage. The mask finally stripped away to reveal the monster underneath. "You were supposed to drink it all," she hissed. "Supposed to die in your sleep. But you couldn't even do that right. Why? Why?" Her laugh was bitter, broken. "Because I loved you. Because I gave you everything and you threw me away for that worthless Luna. Because the throne should have been mine. The child." Kaylor's voice was shaking. "Was he mine?" Nira's smile was vicious. "Of course he was. Everyone knew it. Everyone except you. And the truth would have destroyed my plans, so I made sure you'd never believe it." "Where is she?" "Dead. If she's not dead, she will be soon. I sent my best killers." Kaylor's vision went red. His claws sank deeper into Naira's throat, and she gasped, choking on her own blood. He could kill her, should kill her, rip her throat out and leave her corpse for the crows. But death was too easy, too quick. Commander Voss arrived with a dozen guards. Kaylor threw Naira at their feet. "Take her to the dungeons. Iron chains. I want her alive. I want her to stand trial before the entire empire so everyone can see what she is." Nira screamed and thrashed as they dragged her away. But Kaylor didn't watch. He was already moving, already running, because somewhere out in that frozen wasteland, his Luna and his son were dying, and it was his fault. The question now wasn't whether he could fix it. It was whether there would be anything left to save when he finally found them. Kaylor rode through the frozen wasteland like a wolf possessed, his mount half dead beneath him, foam flying from its mouth. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, stopping only to change horses at outposts along the way, and every hour that passed felt like another nail being driven into his chest. The bond scar where Celine had been ripped away burned like acid. It had been a dull ache before, easy to ignore when he'd convinced himself she deserved it. But now that he knew the truth, now that the lies had been stripped away, the pain was unbearable, a constant reminder of what he'd destroyed with his own hands. Commander Voss rode beside him, his face grim. "My king, the horses can't take much more of this." "Then we walk." "Sir, we're still 2 days from the borderlands. If we push any harder—" "I don't care." Kaylor's voice was raw, scraped clean of everything except desperation. "She's out there. My son is out there. And if they're dead because I was too blind to see the truth, then I deserve whatever hell is waiting for me." Voss said nothing. What could he say? The entire empire knew what had happened, knew that their alpha king had been played like a fool by a scheming mistress, knew that he'd cast out his innocent Luna and true heir based on fabricated evidence. The shame of it should have killed Kaylor, would have killed a lesser wolf. But shame was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when Celine and Lucien were still out there somewhere, hunted and alone. Behind them rode 20 of Kaylor's best warriors, handpicked for their tracking skills and loyalty. They'd been scouring the borderlands for any sign of the Luna, following rumors and whispers, checking every abandoned cabin and hunter's shelter. So far, they'd found nothing. No, that wasn't quite true. They'd found bodies. Rogue corpses scattered through the woods, their throats torn out, their blood frozen in the snow. Signs of a fight, signs that Celine had defended herself. But no sign of her. No sign of the child. And every empty cabin, every cold trail, every dead end drove Kaylor closer to the edge of madness. A scout rode up fast, his horse's breath coming in ragged clouds. "My king, we found something. 1/2 mile east. A cabin. Recent fire damage. Blood. Kaylor's heart stopped. Show me. They rode hard, branches whipping at their faces, snow flying. The cabin appeared through the trees like a ghost, half collapsed, its walls blackened with soot. The smell of old smoke hung heavy in the air, and underneath it, the scent of blood. Kaylor was off his horse before it had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground hard. He approached the cabin like a man walking toward his own execution, every step heavier than the last. The door hung open. Inside, the destruction was total, furniture smashed, walls scorched, and in the center of the room, a cot soaked with dried blood. Too much blood. Kaylor's knees buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe, his claws digging into wood, splinters cutting his palms. She'd given birth here, in this frozen shack at the edge of nowhere, with no midwife, no healer, nothing. She'd brought his son into the world alone and bleeding while Kaylor sat in his warm palace, drinking poisoned wine and believing lies. My king. Voss stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. There's a survivor. Old Wolf, Garrick. He's badly wounded, but alive. Where? The scouts found him in a cave 200 yards north. He's been trying to crawl south, tracking the Luna. Kaylor was moving before Voss finished speaking. They found Garrick propped against a boulder, his chest wrapped in bloody bandages, his breathing shallow and labored. The old wolf's eyes flickered open when Kaylor approached, and something cold and judgmental passed across his face. Come to finish what your mistress started? Garrick's voice was a rasp. Where is she? Gone. The sacred wolves took her and the boys south 3 days ago, told them to head for Crescent Forest. Kaylor's relief was so intense it made him dizzy. They're alive? They were when they left, but Naira's assassins are still hunting them, and the Luna was weak, lost too much blood during the birth. I don't know if she'll make it. The words hit like a physical blow. Kaylor sank to his knees in the snow, his hands shaking. This is my fault, all of it. Yeah. Garrick's expression didn't soften. It is. I need to find her. Need to what? Apologize? Tell her you're sorry for throwing her away like garbage? For calling your own son a bastard in front of the entire empire? Kaylor's jaw clenched. I know what I did. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're still the same arrogant bastard who chose pride over truth. You didn't come looking for her because you suddenly grew a conscience. You came because you finally got caught. That's not, isn't it? Garrick's eyes were hard as stone. You want forgiveness, boy. You're talking to the wrong wolf. I'm not the one you destroyed. I just want to make this right. Some things can't be made right. Some things, once you break them, stay broken forever. The words settled into Kaylor's chest like lead, but he forced himself to his feet, forced himself to meet Garrick's gaze. Maybe you're right. Maybe I can't fix this. But I can make damn sure Naira and every other bastard who tried to hurt my family pays for it. Your family. Garrick's laugh was bitter. You threw them away, remember? I remember. Kaylor's voice dropped to a growl. And I'll remember it every day for the rest of my life. But they're still mine. Still my Luna and my heir. And I will burn this entire empire to ash before I let anyone hurt them again. Garrick studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. Crescent Forest, 3 days south if you ride hard. But you better pray you get there before Naira's killers do. Because if that Luna dies protecting your son, her blood is on your hands. It already is. In Crescent Forest, Celine woke to the sound of wind chimes. Not real wind chimes. The sacred wolves had no use for human trinkets. These were bones. Hollow bird bones strung from trees, clacking together in the breeze, creating a sound that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. She sat up slowly, her body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached. Her abdomen felt like it had been torn open and sewn back together with barbed wire. But she was alive. And more importantly, Lucien was alive. Her son slept in a woven basket beside her, wrapped in furs that smelled like pine and wild things. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, steady and strong. The royal crest on his shoulder gleamed silver in the dim light filtering through the tent. You should rest more, a voice said. Celine looked up to find a woman standing in the entrance. She was tall and lean, with hair like white gold and eyes that shifted between blue and gray depending on the light. Fey blood, Celine realized. Old blood. The kind that remembered when wolves and fae had walked the same paths. Who are you? Mira. I lead the Crescent Pack. The sacred wolves brought you to our territory 3 nights ago. You've been unconscious most of that time. Celine's hand instinctively moved to Lucian. And my son? Healthy, strong, he has his father's eyes. Something twisted in Celine's chest at the mention of Kylor. Don't. Mira raised an eyebrow. Don't what? Talk about him. I don't want to hear his name. Fair enough. Mira settled onto a low stool, her movements graceful and predatory. But you should know. Word has reached us from the north. The Alpha King discovered Naira's betrayal. He's coming for you. Celine's laugh was sharp and humorless. Let him come. He can explain to his son why he wasn't there when he was born, why he chose to believe lies instead of the woman who loved him. Love is a dangerous thing for wolves like us. It makes us weak, makes us vulnerable. I know that now. Mira's expression softened slightly. The sacred wolves say your son carries the old power, the kind that hasn't been seen in the bloodline for generations. They believe he's destined to restore the Empire. The Empire can rot for all I care. Celine's voice was steel. All I want is to keep my son safe. That may not be possible. Mira leaned forward, her eyes intense. Naira has placed a bounty on your head. Every mercenary and rogue between here and the northern border is hunting you. And there's something else. Something worse. What could be worse than a kingdom full of killers? Naira has an ally. Someone with resources and reach beyond what a disgraced mistress should have. Someone who wants the northern throne destroyed and all its heirs dead. Who? Mira hesitated. We don't know yet. But whoever it is, they've been funding the rogue attacks across the Empire, organizing them, turning random violence into coordinated strikes. Celine's blood ran cold. You're saying this is bigger than Naira? Much bigger. Mira stood, her expression grim. Whatever game Naira was playing, she was just a piece on someone else's board. And that someone wants your son dead before he can threaten their plans. Then we run. We disappear, change our names, live somewhere the Empire can't reach. You can run, but they'll find you eventually. Mira's voice was gentle but implacable. Your son carries the royal crest. Anyone with eyes will know what he is. The only way to keep him safe is to take back the power that's rightfully his. He's a baby. He won't always be. And when he grows up, he'll need to know how to fight, how to survive, how to rule. Celine looked down at Lucian, sleeping peacefully despite the danger circling them like vultures. Her beautiful, perfect son, who'd done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong parents at the wrong time. I never wanted this for him. None of us get to choose the lives we're born into. Mira's hand rested briefly on Celine's shoulder. But we can choose what we make of them. The attack came at dawn. Celine woke to screams and the smell of smoke. She grabbed Lucienne and rolled out of the tent just as an arrow punched through the fabric where she'd been sleeping. Rogues. At least 30 of them pouring into the camp from all sides. But these weren't the disorganized rabble she'd fought before. These moved like soldiers, trained, disciplined, lethal. Mira was already fighting, her claws flashing silver in the early light. Around her, the Crescent Pack met the attackers head-on, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. Celine ran. Not away from the fight, toward it, because at the center of the attacking force, directing the assault with cold precision, was a figure in black armor. And when that figure turned, Celine saw her face. Not Naira. Someone else. Someone Celine had never seen before, but whose scent carried a familiar edge. Eastern Ridge Pack. Same as Naira. The woman's eyes locked onto Celine, and her smile was cruel and satisfied. There you are, Luna. Lady Naira sends her regards. Tell Naira she can rot in hell. Oh, she will. The woman drew a curved blade that gleamed with poison. But you'll get there first. She moved like lightning. Celine barely managed to dodge the first strike, the blade whistling past her ear. The second caught her shoulder, slicing through skin and muscle. Celine bit back a scream and counterattacked, her claws raking across the woman's face. Blood sprayed. The woman snarled and came at her again, faster, more vicious. They fought through the burning camp, circling each other like predators. Celine was still weak from childbirth, still bleeding from wounds that hadn't healed. But she had something her opponent didn't. Absolutely nothing left to lose. She caught the woman's wrist mid-strike and twisted, feeling bones snap. The blade clattered to the ground. Celine kicked it away and drove her knee into the woman's gut, following up with an elbow to the temple. The woman went down hard. Celine straddled her, claws at her throat. "Who's the ally? Who's helping Naira?" The woman's laugh was wet and bubbling. "You really don't know? Gods, you're even more pathetic than she said. Tell me." The woman's eyes gleamed with malice. Someone close to the throne. Someone, Yuan, who's been there all along, watching and waiting. And when your precious mate finally realizes who it is, it'll destroy him. Before Celine could press further, an arrow sprouted from the woman's eye. She convulsed once and went still. Celine spun to see one of Mira's warriors lowering a bow. The battle was ending. The rogues were retreating, leaving their dead behind. But the camp was destroyed. Half the pack was wounded or dead, and Celine's shoulder was bleeding heavily enough to make her vision blur. Mira appeared at her side, her own face streaked with blood. "You need to leave. Now. More will come." "Where do I go?" "Anywhere but here." Mira pressed a rolled map into Celine's hands. "There are safe houses marked. Allies who still remember the old oaths. Use them. Come with us." "I can't. My pack needs me." "But I'll buy you time." Mira's eyes were fierce. "Get your son to safety, Luna. Make him strong. And when the time comes, teach him to take back what's his." Celine nodded, clutching Lucian to her chest. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Mira's expression was grim. The real war is just beginning. Kaler reached Crescent Forest 2 hours too late. The camp was still smoking when he arrived, bodies scattered across the blood-soaked ground. His wolves spread out, checking for survivors, but Kalor's focus was singular. He could smell Celine. Her scent was everywhere, mixed with blood and smoke and fear. But she wasn't here. "My king." Voss approached, his face pale. "We found survivors. They say the Luna fought off an assassin and fled south with the child. She's wounded, but alive." "How long ago?" 2 hours. Maybe less. Then we can catch her." Kalor was already moving toward his horse when a sound stopped him cold. Slow, mocking applause. He turned to find a figure emerging from the tree line, a man in dark traveling leathers, his face half hidden by a hood. But Kalor recognized that stance, that smirk. Counselor Brennan, one of Kalor's oldest advisors. A wolf who'd served 3 generations of the Draven bloodline, who'd been at Kalor's side since he was a boy, who was supposed to be back at Shadow Peak, managing the Empire in Kalor's absence. Brennan lowered his hood, revealing a face lined with age and cunning. "Took you long enough, boy. I was starting to think you'd never figure it out." Kalor's world tilted sideways. You're the one helping Naira." "Helping?" Brennan's laugh was sharp. "I've been using that stupid girl since before you took the throne. She thought she was so clever, poisoning your mind against the Luna. But every move she made, every lie she told, I whispered in her ear first. Why? Why?" Brennan's expression hardened. "Because the Draven line has ruled for too long. Because your family's power has kept the rest of us in chains for centuries. And because I've been waiting 30 years for the chance to burn it all down. You served my father. My grandfather. I served because I had no choice." Brennan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "But I never stopped planning, never stopped building alliances. And when you stupidly rejected your Luna, you handed me the perfect opportunity. A divided empire, a weakened bloodline. Chaos I could shape into whatever I wanted." Kalor's claws extended. "I'll kill you. You'll try." Brennan gestured, and from the trees emerged more wolves. Dozens of them, all wearing the insignia of packs that should have been loyal to Kalor, all with their weapons drawn. "You see, boy, while you were chasing your Luna across the Empire, I was taking it from you, pack by pack, territory by territory. And by the time you get back to Shadow Peak, there won't be a throne waiting for you." Kalor's warriors drew their weapons, but they were outnumbered 5-1. This was a trap. All of it. Brennan had let him chase Celine south while dismantling his power base in the north. Had used Kalor's guilt and desperation against him. and Kaelor had walked right into it. Commander Voss moved to Kaelor's side, his sword raised. "My king, we need to retreat." "No." Kaelor's voice was cold and final. "We stand." "Sir, we can't." "I said we stand." Kaelor's eyes blazed silver. "I've run from the truth for too long. Run from my mistakes. I'm not running anymore." Brennan's smile was ugly. How noble. The Alpha King, going down fighting. Your father would be so proud. "My father was a better wolf than you'll ever be, and when I rip your throat out, I'll make sure you know it." Brennan laughed and raised his hand. The attack came like a wave. Kaelor met it head on, his wolf roaring to the surface, his claws and teeth finding flesh. Blood sprayed, bones snapped, wolves screamed and died on both sides. But there were too many, far too many. A blade found Kaelor's ribs, then another in his thigh. He kept fighting, kept killing, but his vision was starting to blur. His movements slowing. He was going to die here. In this burned-out camp surrounded by traitors, while Celine and Lucien disappeared into the wilderness. And maybe that was what he deserved. Commander Voss fell beside him, his throat torn open. The other warriors were going down one by one, brave and loyal to the end. Brennan watched from a safe distance, his expression satisfied. "Any last words, Alpha King?" Kaelor sank to his knees, blood pouring from a dozen wounds. "Yeah. One. And what's that?" "Run." Brennan's smile faltered. "What?" Kaelor looked past him, into the trees, and his own smile was sharp and terrible. "I said run." From the forest came a howl that shook the earth itself, and then the sacred wolves arrived. Not just a few, all of them. Hundreds of massive, ancient predators who'd guarded the Empire since before history began. The ones who'd abandoned Shadow Peak when Kaelor rejected Celine. They poured into the clearing like a silver tsunami, and Brennan's army broke and ran. But the sacred wolves were faster. Kaelor watched through dimming vision as they tore through the traitors like paper, their massive jaws crushing bone, their claws eviscerating flesh. Brennan tried to flee, but the largest of the sacred wolves caught him, lifting him by the throat and shaking him like a rag doll. The old counselor's screams were music. Then strong hands gripped Kaelor's shoulders. The lead sacred wolf, the silver-furred giant with eyes like molten gold, lowered himself to Kaelor's level. "You're dying, Alpha King." "I know." Kaelor's words came out wet. Blood filled his mouth. "Good. Maybe I deserve it. Perhaps." The sacred wolf's expression was unreadable. "But your son does not deserve to grow up fatherless, and your Luna does not deserve to raise him alone. She's better off without me. That is not for you to decide." The wolf's claws pierced Kaelor's chest, right over his heart. "This will hurt." White-hot agony flooded Kaelor's body. He screamed, his back arching, every nerve on fire. Power poured into him, wild and ancient, the kind of magic that predated the Empire itself. The sacred wolf was healing him, but at a cost. "You will live, Alpha King, but the debt you owe is steep." The wolf's voice echoed in Kaelor's skull. "You will find your Luna. You will protect your heir, and you will rebuild the empire you nearly destroyed. This is not mercy. This is duty, and you will fulfill it, or I will hunt you down myself and finish what Brennan started." The pain stopped. Kaelor gasped, his wounds closing, his strength returning in a rush that left him dizzy. When he looked up, the sacred wolf was walking away, its pack following. And Kaelor was left kneeling in the blood-soaked clearing, alive and whole, and more terrified than he'd ever been in his life. Because now there were no more excuses, no more running from the truth. He had to face Celine. Had to look into the eyes of the woman he'd destroyed and somehow convince her he wasn't the monster she believed him to be. Had to become the alpha his son deserved, instead of the tyrant he'd become. And he had absolutely no idea how to do any of that, but he would figure it out, or die trying. Because the alternative, living the rest of his life knowing he'd failed them again, was worse than any death. Kaelor stood, his body still trembling from the sacred magic, and looked south toward where Celine had fled. "I'm coming," he thought. "I'm coming, and I won't stop until I find you, even if you never forgive me. Even if seeing me destroys you all over again, I'm coming." Celine's shoulder was still bleeding when she reached the Ironwood Pass, a narrow canyon carved through black stone that looked like the earth had been split open by something violent and ancient. The wound from the assassin's blade hadn't stopped seeping, and every step sent fresh fire through her arm. But she kept moving, had to keep moving. Lucian was strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling, his tiny body warm against her skin. He'd been eerily quiet for the past hour, as if he understood that silence meant survival. His silver eyes tracked everything, taking in the world with an awareness that seemed impossible for a newborn. Sometimes Celine looked at him and saw Kaelor staring back. Same eyes, same stubborn set to his jaw even at 3 weeks old. It made her chest ache in ways she couldn't afford to feel right now. The map Mira had given her showed a safe house at the southern end of the pass, a former trading post that had been abandoned years ago but supposedly still had supplies. Food, medicine, a place to rest where assassins and bounty hunters wouldn't immediately find them. If she could just make it there, just hold on a little longer. Her vision swam. The blood loss was catching up to her, making her steps unsteady. She pressed her good hand against the canyon wall, using it to keep herself upright. Almost there. Just a few more miles. Then she heard hoofbeats. Celine's heart seized. She looked back and saw riders entering the canyon behind her. At least a dozen of them, moving fast, their weapons gleaming in the afternoon sun. Not rogues. These wore uniforms. Northern Empire soldiers, which meant Kaelor had found her. Panic flooded Celine's veins, sharper than any physical pain. She started running, her boots slipping on loose stone, Lucian bouncing against her chest. But running was pointless. She was exhausted, wounded, and on foot. They'd catch her in minutes. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides, offering no escape route. No place to hide. Just smooth black stone stretching up toward a sky that suddenly felt very far away. This is it, she thought. This is where it ends. The riders closed the distance. Celine spun to face them, her back against the canyon wall, her arms wrapped protectively around Lucy. And if they wanted her son, they'd have to go through her corpse first. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away. Kaelor. He looked like hell. His face was thinner, harder, carved down to bare essentials by guilt and sleepless nights. His clothes were travel-stained and torn, but his eyes, those silver eyes that had haunted her dreams, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Celine. His voice was rough, stripped raw. Don't. Celine's own voice came out sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare say my name like you have any right to it. Kaelor dismounted slowly, his movements careful, non-threatening, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I'm not here to hurt you. You already did. I know. He took a step forward. Celine, I know what I did. I know I can't take it back, but please, just listen. No. Celine's claws extended. You don't get to do this. You don't get to ride out here like some tragic hero and expect me to fall at your feet because you finally figured out the truth. I'm not expecting anything. Kaelor's hands were open, empty. I just need you to know that Naira's in a cell. Brennan's dead. The conspiracy's been exposed. You're safe now. Safe? Celine's laugh was bitter enough to corrode steel. I've been hunted across half the Empire. I fought assassins while bleeding out from childbirth. I've watched good wolves die protecting me. And you think I'm safe because you killed a few traitors? What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me why. Celine's voice cracked. Why you believed her instead of me. Why you threw away 3 years like they meant nothing. Why you looked me in the eyes and called our son a bastard without even questioning it. Kaelor flinched like she'd struck him. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of being made a fool. Of losing control. Of looking weak in front of the packs. His jaw clenched. I built everything on strength and dominance and absolute certainty. And when Naira planted that doubt, when she made me question whether my own Luna had betrayed me, it terrified me. So I did what I always do. I attacked first. Destroyed it before it could destroy me. And that makes it okay? No. Nothing makes it okay. Kaelor's voice dropped. I rejected you because I was a coward, because I chose my pride over the woman I loved, and I've spent every moment since then knowing I made the worst mistake of my life. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. Celine wanted to rage at him, wanted to tell him that love wasn't enough, that saying sorry couldn't heal what he'd broken. But she was so tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of carrying all this pain alone. You want forgiveness? Her voice was barely above a whisper. You want me to say it's all right and come back to Shadow Peak and pretend none of this happened? No. Kaylor shook his head. I want you to live, you and our son. I want you to have the life you deserve, even if that life doesn't include me. Celine stared at him. That was the first thing he'd said that sounded like truth instead of rehearsed apology. Before she could respond, Lucien started crying. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. Kaylor's entire body went rigid, his eyes dropping to the bundle in Celine's arms. Can I see him? The question came out broken. Celine's arms tightened instinctively. Then, slowly, grudgingly, she loosened her grip enough for Kaylor to see his son's face. Lucien stared up at them both with those impossible silver eyes. The royal crest on his shoulder was clearly visible, undeniable proof of his bloodline. Kaylor made a sound Celine had never heard from him before, something between a gasp and a sob. He sank to his knees in the dirt, his hands shaking. He's beautiful, Kaylor whispered. He's perfect. His name is Lucien. Lucien. Kaylor's eyes were wet. Does he know who I am? He knows his father is a man who threw him away before he was born. The words were meant to wound, and they did. Kaylor's head dropped, his shoulders curving inward. Then the canyon exploded. Fire erupted from the walls themselves, ancient trap magic activating without warning. Flames roared to life, cutting off both ends of the pass, boxing them in. And from the shadows stepped Naira. Not alone. She had warriors with her, at least 30, all armed, all moving with military precision. But it wasn't the warriors that made Celine's blood freeze. It was what Naira was holding, a collar. Iron and silver fused together, inscribed with runes that pulsed with dark magic, the kind of magic that could suppress a wolf's power. Bind them, break them. Naira's smile was poison and triumph. Did you really think a cell could hold me? I've had contingency plans in place for months, loyal followers ready to break me out. And now, here you all are, trapped like rats. Kaylor was on his feet, placing himself between Naira and Celine. You're insane. No, I'm patient. Naira's eyes gleamed. You took everything from me, Kaylor. My place at your side, my claim to the throne. So now I'm going to take everything from you. She gestured, and her warriors surged forward. Kaylor's soldiers met them head-on, the canyon filling with the sounds of combat. Steel clashed against steel. Wolves snarled and fought and died. But Kaylor didn't join the fight. He stood his ground in front of Celine and Lucien, his body a living shield. Run, he growled. Take our son and run. There's nowhere to run. Then hide, climb, do whatever you have to do. But get him out of here. Celine looked at the sheer canyon walls. There were handholds, barely, cracks and ledges she might be able to use if she wasn't wounded and carrying a baby. It would take every ounce of strength she had left. She started climbing. Behind her, she heard Kaylor roar as he shifted, his wolf form massive and lethal, heard Naira screaming orders, heard the wet sounds of violence. Celine didn't look back. Couldn't look back. She focused on the next handhold, the next foothold, her wounded shoulder screaming as she pulled herself and Lucien higher. Blood dripped from her arm, making the stone slippery. Her muscles were shaking, but she kept climbing because stopping meant falling and falling meant death. She was 20 feet up when the arrow hit her calf. Celine bit back a scream, her grip almost failing. She looked down and saw Naira standing below, a bow in her hands, another arrow already knocked. You don't get to escape, Naira called up. You don't get a happy ending. The second arrow flew. Celine twisted, using her body to shield Lucien, and the arrow punched into her back instead of her son. Pain exploded through her spine, white-hot and paralyzing. Her grip failed. She fell. For a moment, there was nothing but air and terror and the absolute certainty that she was about to die. Then strong arms caught her, breaking her fall, lowering her carefully to the ground. Kaylor, still in human form, his face and chest covered in blood that wasn't all his. I've got you, he said. I've got you both. Celine couldn't feel her legs. The arrow in her back had hit something vital, severing nerves or worse. She could taste blood in her mouth. Lucien. Her voice was fading. Keep him safe. You're going to keep him safe. You're going to live through this. Kaelor. She gripped his arm with her good hand, forcing him to meet her eyes. Promise me, whatever happens, promise me you'll protect him. I promise. Tears cut tracks through the blood on his face. But you're not dying here. I won't let you. Not your choice. Nira's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. How touching, the mighty Alpha King crying over the Luna he destroyed. Tell me, Kaelor, does it hurt? Does it feel like your heart's being ripped out? Kaelor laid Selene down gently and stood. When he turned to face Nira, something had changed in his expression. The guilt was still there, the grief. But underneath it was something colder, something absolutely lethal. You want to see pain? His voice was deadly quiet. I'll show you pain. He shifted again, but this time was different. This time the power that flooded through him was pure and ancient, the same magic the sacred wolves had poured into him. His wolf form grew larger, more massive, until he stood 8 feet tall at the shoulder, his fur blazing silver white. Nira's smile faltered. Her warriors charged, but they might as well have been throwing themselves against a mountain. Kaelor tore through them like paper, his jaws crushing bone, his claws eviscerating flesh. No strategy, no mercy, just pure, focused violence. He was magnificent and terrifying, a force of nature given teeth and claws and rage. But there were too many. Even with his enhanced power, even fighting with everything he had, they kept coming. And Nira was circling toward where Selene lay bleeding, that cursed collar in her hands. Selene tried to move, tried to protect Lucian, but her body wouldn't respond. The paralysis was spreading. She could barely breathe. Nira stood over her, the collar open and ready. Once this is on you, you'll be helpless, powerless. And I'll take your son and raise him as my own. Teach him that his mother was a whore and his father was a fool. Selene's vision was going dark at the edges, but she forced herself to speak, each word costing her. You won't live that long. Won't I? Nira smiled. Who's going to stop me? You? You can barely move. Kaelor, he's too busy trying not to get overwhelmed. Face it, Luna, you've lost. Maybe. Selene's hand moved to the small knife still tucked in her belt. The one she'd used to kill rogues in the snow, the one she'd kept sharp and close for moments exactly like this. But you're coming with me. She drove the blade up into Nira's gut with every ounce of strength she had left. Nira's eyes went wide. She stumbled back, the collar clattering from her hands, blood pouring between her fingers. You bitch! Nira's voice was wet, gurgling. You actually stabbed me. You tried to kill my son. Selene's words were fading, her consciousness slipping. I'd do worse. Nira collapsed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Around them the fighting was dying down. Kaelor's warriors had won, though at a terrible cost. Bodies littered the canyon floor. Kaelor shifted back to human form and ran to Selene's side. His hands were shaking as he pulled her into his lap, cradling her and Lucian together. Stay with me. His voice was desperate. Please, Selene, just stay with me. Can't. She could barely see his face now. Everything was shadows and pain. Too much blood. No. You don't get to do this. You don't get to leave me. Not leaving. Going to watch over him. Always. Selene. Love him. Her hand found his, squeezed weakly. Teach him to be better than us. I will. I swear I will. Good. Her eyes were closing. That's good. Selene, please. But she was already gone, her body going slack in his arms, her last breath escaping in a soft sigh. Kaelor held her, his howl of grief echoing through the canyon, raw and broken, and full of a pain that would never fully heal. In his arms, Lucian started crying, as if he understood that something fundamental had just shattered, that the world had changed in ways it could never undo. And in that moment, surrounded by death and ash, and the ruins of everything he'd destroyed, Kaelor made a vow. He would honor Selene's sacrifice, would raise their son to be the alpha she'd believed he could be, would rebuild the empire into something worthy of her memory, even if it took the rest of his life, even if he never forgave himself. He would do this one thing right. But first, he had to get his son to safety, had to get him somewhere the remaining assassins and conspirators couldn't reach, had to figure out how to be a father when he'd barely managed to be a decent mate. Commander Voss approached carefully, his own face streaked with blood and tears. "My king, we need to move. More enemies could be coming." Kaelor looked down at Celine's face, peaceful now in a way it hadn't been since the rejection. He wanted to stay here, wanted to hold her until the world ended, but Lucien needed him. So Kaelor stood, still cradling both his dead Luna and his living son, and gave the orders that would determine the Empire's future. "Burn the bodies of the traitors. Give our fallen warriors a proper funeral, and send word to every pack in the Empire. Tell them the truth about what happened. All of it. The conspiracy. The lies. Everything. Sir, that will make you look like a fool who nearly destroyed his own bloodline." Kaelor's voice was hollow. "I know, but they deserve the truth. And my son deserves to grow up in an empire built on honesty instead of pride." Voss bowed and moved away to carry out the orders. Alone with his family, Kaelor looked down at Lucien. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at him with those knowing silver eyes. "I failed your mother," Kaelor whispered. "Failed her in every way that mattered, but I swear on her memory I won't fail you. I'll teach you everything I know, make you strong enough to survive what's coming. And when you're ready, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you the truth about what I did, about the price of pride and the cost of lies." He kissed Celine's forehead one last time. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." Then he turned and started walking, carrying his son toward an uncertain future. Behind him, smoke rose from the burning bodies, black against the setting sun. And ahead, somewhere in the distance, the Empire waited, broken and bleeding and full of wolves who would question his right to rule. But Kaelor didn't care about the Empire anymore, didn't care about power or dominance or the throne. All he cared about was the tiny life in his arms, the son who carried Celine's strength and his own cursed bloodline, the heir who would either save the northern territories or watch them burn. And as Kaelor walked out of that canyon of death, one thought burned through his grief-shattered mind. The real war was just beginning, because the conspirators who'd used Naira were still out there. The enemies who wanted the Draven bloodline destroyed hadn't given up. And somewhere in the shadows, forces were gathering that would make everything that had come before look like a minor skirmish. Kaelor had lost his mate, had failed the woman he loved in the most fundamental way possible, but he still had his son, and he would burn the world to ash before he let anyone take Lucien from him. The question was no longer whether he could survive what was coming. It was whether the Empire could survive what Kaelor was about to become. The funeral pyre burned for 3 days. Kaelor stood watch the entire time, refusing food, refusing sleep, his eyes fixed on the flames consuming Celine's body. The sacred wolves had given him the ancient rites, the kind reserved for fallen Lunas who'd died protecting the bloodline. Her pyre was built from ironwood and laurel, herbs that carried souls to whatever waited beyond death. Lucien slept against Kaelor's chest, wrapped in furs, oblivious to the significance of the smoke rising into a sky that had turned the color of old bruises. The baby's heartbeat was steady, strong, a constant reminder of what Celine had given her life to preserve. On the 3rd day, when the flames finally died and only ash remained, Kaelor spoke for the first time since leaving the canyon. "She deserved better than me." Commander Voss stood nearby, his own grief etched into every line of his face. He'd loved Celine too, in his own way. Had watched her bring warmth to the cold halls of Shadow Peak, had seen how she'd tried to gentle the savage edges of Kaelor's rule. "Yes," Voss said quietly. "She did." The honesty should have hurt. Instead, it felt like relief. Like someone finally speaking a truth Kaelor had been drowning in alone. "The Empire's falling apart," Kaelor continued, his voice rough from disuse. "Half the packs are in open rebellion. The other half are waiting to see if I'm strong enough to hold the throne. And all I can think about is how I held her while she died and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it." Voss was silent for a long moment. Then, "What are you going to do?" Kaelor looked down at Lucien. The baby's eyes were open now, those impossible silver eyes that saw too much. "I'm going to raise my son, teach him everything I know, and when he's old enough, I'm going to tell him the truth about what I did to his mother. That's not what I meant." "What are you going to do about the Empire? The Empire can burn for all I care. My king." "I'm not a king." Kaelor's laugh was bitter. "I'm a fool who destroyed the only good thing in his life because he was too proud to see the truth. Kings protect their people. I couldn't even protect my own mate. Then learn. Voss stepped closer, his voice hard. You failed. Own it. But don't dishonor her sacrifice by giving up now. She died protecting that boy so he could grow up to rule. Are you really going to throw that away? The words hit like a physical blow. Kaler's arms tightened around Lucien, and for the first time since the canyon, he felt something other than grief. Rage. Not at Voss. At himself. At the empire that had demanded so much and given back so little. At a system built on dominance and violence that had taught him strength mattered more than truth. He'd been raised to believe an alpha's power came from fear and control, from never showing weakness, from crushing anyone who dared question him. And that belief had killed the woman he loved. What would she want? Kaler's voice cracked. If Celine were here, what would she tell me to do? You know what she'd say? Voss's expression softened. She'd tell you to be better, to build something worth protecting instead of just holding on to power, to raise your son in an empire where love doesn't make you weak. Kaler closed his eyes. He could almost hear Celine's voice, feel her hand on his arm the way she used to when he got too caught up in his own darkness. You're stronger than you think, she'd told him once. You just have to stop being afraid of what that strength looks like without all the armor. He'd dismissed it then. Thought she was being naive, sentimental. Now he understood. Real strength wasn't about domination. It was about standing in the ruins of everything you'd destroyed and choosing to build something better from the ashes, even when every instinct screamed to burn it all down instead. Gather the commanders, Kaler said finally, and send word to every pack in the Empire. Tell them the Alpha King is calling a summit. Tell them I'm going to address what happened, all of it. Sir, some of those packs want you dead. I know, but they deserve to hear the truth. And Lucien deserves to inherit an empire built on something other than lies. The summit was held in the ruins of the ancient capital, a sprawling complex of stone halls that had stood for 1,000 years. Kaler chose it deliberately. Not Shadow Peak, with all its associations of tyranny and fear, but a place that represented the Empire's origins, back when the packs had first united under a single banner. They came from every territory, alphas and elders and warriors, all of them scarred and suspicious and ready for violence. Some came to demand answers, others came to challenge Kaler's right to rule. A few came hoping to see him fall. Kaler stood on a raised platform in the main hall, Lucien in his arms. No throne, no crown. Just a father holding his son, facing the judgment of hundreds of wolves who had every reason to hate him. The hall was silent except for the wind howling through broken windows. You all know what I did, Kaler began. His voice carried through the space, clear and unflinching. I rejected my Luna based on lies, cast out the mother of my heir, allowed a conspiracy to nearly destroy the bloodline. I failed as a mate, failed as an alpha, failed as a king. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some angry, some satisfied, some just waiting to see where this was going. I could make excuses, could tell you I was manipulated, that I was lied to, that I didn't know the truth. But that would be another lie. Because the truth is, I chose not to question the evidence, chose pride over my mate, chose my image over the woman who'd given me everything. An elder from the Western Ridge stepped forward. So you admit you're unfit to rule? Yes. The word fell like a stone. I'm unfit. I've proven that. But my son isn't. Kaler lifted Lucien higher so everyone could see the royal crest on the baby's shoulder, glowing faintly silver in the dim light. This is Lucien Draven, true heir to the northern throne, son of Celine Vale, the bravest Luna this empire has ever known. He carries the purest alpha bloodline in centuries. The sacred wolves themselves have recognized him, and when he's old enough, he will rule an empire that's better than the one I nearly destroyed. Another alpha called out, and until then, who rules? I do. Kaler's voice hardened. Not because I deserve it, but because someone has to hold the empire together until my son is ready. And I owe Celine that much. I owe him that much. Why should we follow you? The challenge came from a young alpha, barely old enough to hold his territory. You've shown us you can't be trusted. You're right. Kaler met the young wolf's eyes. I can't be trusted. Not the way I was. So I'm changing the rules. He gestured, and Commander Voss stepped forward carrying a scroll sealed with the royal crest. This is a new law I'm implementing immediately. From this day forward, every Alpha in the Northern Empire has the right to challenge any order I give, publicly. Without fear of execution, every major decision I make will be voted on by a council of elders representing all territories. And if that council finds I'm acting against the Empire's interests, they have the power to remove me from the throne. The hall erupted. Wolves were shouting, arguing, some in support, others outraged at the idea of limiting an Alpha King's power. Kaelor waited for the noise to die down. I know this sounds weak to some of you, goes against everything we've been taught about how power works. But the old way nearly destroyed us, nearly cost us the purest air in generations. So we're going to try something different. We're going to build an empire where strength comes from unity instead of fear, where questioning your leaders makes you wise instead of traitorous. And if it fails, someone called out, then it fails. Kaelor's smile was sharp and sad. And you can rip me apart and find someone better, but I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to make this work. For my son, for the mate I failed, for an empire that deserves better than what I gave it. He looked down at Lucien, who was staring up at him with those knowing eyes. Selene believed I could be better than the tyrant I'd become. She saw something in me worth saving even when I couldn't see it myself. So I'm going to honor that belief. Going to prove she wasn't wrong to love me even if I was too broken to deserve it. The hall was quiet now. Kaelor could feel the tension, the wolves trying to decide if he was sincere or just playing another game. Then an old Alpha from the southern pack stepped forward. Her name was Kira, and she'd ruled her territory for 40 years with iron discipline and unexpected compassion. You broke the sacred bond, she said, her voice carrying weight. Cast out a Luna who'd done nothing wrong. By ancient law, you should be executed. I know, but by that same law, the sacred wolves have the right to intercede on behalf of the bloodline. Kira's eyes were sharp. They healed you, brought you back from death. That means they believe you still have a role to play. So I ask you, Kaelor Draven, what will you teach that boy in your arms? Kaelor looked at his son, at the tiny face that held echoes of Selene's features mixed with his own, at the future king who would inherit all of Kaelor's mistakes along with his power. I'll teach him that strength without compassion is tyranny, that pride is a poison that destroys everything you love, that the hardest thing an Alpha can do isn't killing his enemies, it's admitting when he's wrong and choosing to be better. Kira studied him for a long moment. Then she bowed her head. I accept your terms. The Southern Packs will support your rule until the heir is ready. One by one, other Alphas stepped forward. Not all of them. Some left in disgust, refusing to serve under a king who'd shown such weakness. Others stayed silent, waiting to see how things developed. But enough accepted. Enough to hold the empire together. Enough to give Lucien a chance. Blag. The years that followed were brutal. Kaelor rebuilt the empire one painful compromise at a time. He met with every pack that had grievances, listened to complaints about taxes and territory disputes and ancient feuds, made decisions that infuriated traditionalists and barely satisfied reformers. He fought 3 separate rebellions, put down 2 assassination attempts, navigated a dozen political crises that would have destroyed a lesser ruler. But slowly, impossibly, the empire stabilized. The Council of Elders actually worked. Turns out wolves were more willing to follow orders they'd had a voice in creating. The territories stopped bleeding from constant internal conflict. Trade routes reopened. Packs that had been enemies for generations started finding common ground. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even good most days, but it was better than the alternative. And through it all, Kaelor raised his son. He taught Lucien to fight, because an Alpha needed to be able to defend himself. But he also taught him to listen, to question, to understand that the wolves he ruled were individuals with their own needs and fears, not just pieces on a game board. He told Lucien stories about Selene, about her warmth and her stubbornness, and the way she'd refused to let Kaelor use violence as a substitute for actually dealing with his problems. He made sure his son knew his mother had been a hero, not a victim, that she'd fought assassins and survived in the wilderness and sacrificed herself willingly to protect the future. And when Lucien was old enough to understand, Kaelor told him the truth about the rejection. They were in the garden where Selene used to walk. a space Kaelor had preserved exactly as she'd left it. Lucian was 7 years old, small for his age, but with his mother's fierce eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. "I need to tell you something," Kaelor said, "about what I did to your mother." Lucian looked up from the flowers he'd been examining. "I know you rejected her. You know the facts, but I want you to understand why. Why I made the worst decision of my life. Why your mother died hating me." "She didn't hate you." Lucian's voice was matter-of-fact. "Garrick told me. He said she was angry and hurt, but she never stopped loving you. That's why it hurt so much." Kaelor's throat closed up. The old wolf had visited several times over the years, checking on the boy, making sure Kaelor was keeping his promises. "I was afraid," Kaelor said finally. "Afraid of looking weak, of being wrong, of trusting someone more than I trusted my own pride. So when someone gave me an excuse to push your mother away before she could hurt me, I took it. Didn't question it. Didn't even try to verify the evidence. I just believed the worst because it was easier than being vulnerable." Lucian was quiet for a long moment. "That was stupid." "Yes, it was." "Are you still like that? Still afraid?" "Every day." Kaelor managed a rough smile. "But now I know what that fear costs, so I fight it instead of letting it control me." Lucian nodded slowly. Then, "Do you think she'd forgive you if she were here?" "I don't know. I hope so. But even if she wouldn't, I still have to keep trying to be the man she believed I could be. Because that's what she died for. A future where you could grow up in an empire that valued truth over pride." The boy reached out and took Kaelor's hand. His grip was small but surprisingly strong. "I'll help," Lucian said. "When I'm big enough, we'll build it together." And in that moment, holding his son's hand in a garden his lost mate had loved, Kaelor felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Peace, not happiness. He'd lost the right to that when he cast Celine out, but a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right. That maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building a future that honored the people you'd failed. On Lucien's 18th birthday, the Empire gathered for his ascension ceremony. He'd grown into everything Celine had believed he could be, strong and compassionate, fierce and wise, with his mother's ability to see the good in people and his father's strategic mind. The Pax loved him in a way they'd never loved Kaelor, because Lucien had never ruled through fear. He ruled through respect. Kaelor stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his son accept the crown, and felt the weight of 18 years lift from his shoulders. He'd done it. Kept his promise, raised an heir worthy of the throne, built an empire stable enough to hand over without it immediately collapsing into chaos. Celine would have been proud. After the ceremony, after the celebration had died down and most of the guests had left, Lucien found Kaelor standing in that same garden, looking at the flowers that still bloomed every spring. "You're thinking about her," Lucien said. "Always." Kaelor's voice was soft. "Every decision I make, I ask myself what she would have wanted, what she would have done differently." "You did well." Lucien's hand gripped his father's shoulder. "She'd be proud of what you built, what we built together." "Maybe." Kaelor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Or maybe she'd still be angry that I let pride destroy us in the first place." "I'll never know. That's the price I pay." "You've paid enough." Lucien's voice was firm. "You've spent 18 years torturing yourself, rebuilding an empire from ruins, raising me to be better than the system that broke you. At some point, you have to forgive yourself." "I can't." The words came out raw. "Because the moment I forgive myself, the moment I stop carrying this guilt, I lose the only connection I have left to her. The pain is all I have." "That's not true." Lucien gestured to the garden, to the empire beyond, to himself. "You have this. All of it. A kingdom that's finally at peace. Packs that trust their leaders. A son who loves you despite knowing every terrible thing you've done." Kaelor looked at Lucien. Really looked at him. Saw Celine's eyes staring back, but filled with understanding instead of condemnation. "She's not gone," Lucien said quietly. "She's in every law you changed, every compromise you made instead of just crushing opposition, every time you chose to listen instead of dominate. That's her legacy, not the tragedy, the transformation." The words broke something inside Kaelor, something that had been locked tight for 18 years. He sank to his knees in the garden dirt and finally let himself cry. Not the harsh, broken sobs from the canyon. These were quieter, deeper, the kind of tears that came when you finally allowed yourself to grieve instead of just surviving. Lucien knelt beside him, one hand on his father's shoulder, solid and steady. "I miss her," Kaylor whispered. "Every single day, I miss her." "I know. I do too. But she's still here. In us, in what we've built. And I think," Lucien's voice was gentle, "that she'd want you to live instead of just existing, to find something other than guilt to hold on to." "Like what?" "Like pride in your son, like satisfaction in an empire that actually works, like the possibility that maybe, someday, you could let yourself be happy again without feeling like you're betraying her memory." Kaylor looked up into the sky, at the moon hanging bright and full above them. Celine had loved nights like this, had dragged him out to watch the stars, laughing when he complained about wasting time on frivolous things. "You're more like her than you know," he told Lucien. "Good. That means I'm doing something right." They sat in silence for a while, father and son, surrounded by flowers and memories and the quiet understanding that some wounds never fully healed. But they could scar, could become part of your strength instead of just your weakness. "Tell me about her," Lucien said finally. "Not the sad parts, the good parts, what she was like when you first met." So Kaylor told him about the lunar summit and a woman arguing with an elder about territory rights, about green eyes that saw past his armor, about 3 years of learning what it meant to love someone more than power, about a Luna who'd changed an empire by refusing to let her mate hide from his own humanity. And as he spoke, Kaylor realized something. Lucien was right. Celine wasn't gone. She was in every choice Kaylor made to be better, every time he chose truth over pride, every compromise and conversation and moment of vulnerability that would have been impossible for the tyrant he used to be. She died in that canyon. But she'd also won, because the empire she'd envisioned, the one where strength came from unity instead of fear, where leaders were held accountable instead of worshipped, where love didn't make you weak. That empire existed now. Not perfect, not finished, but real. And that was worth something, worth everything. Kaylor stood, helping his son to his feet. "She'd be proud of you," he said, "of the man you've become, the king you're going to be. She'd be proud of you too. Eventually." Lucien's smile was soft. "Once she got done being furious with you for being an idiot. That's fair." They walked back toward the palace together, and for the first time in 18 years, Kaylor felt something other than guilt when he thought about Celine. He felt grateful for the time they'd had, for the son she'd given him, for the lesson she'd taught him about what real strength looked like. And maybe, someday, he'd even feel like he deserved the peace he'd built. But for now, watching his son prepare to rule an empire reborn from ashes and blood and impossible choices, Kaylor allowed himself one small truth. He'd failed Celine, failed her in ways that could never be undone. But he hadn't failed their son. And in the end, that was the only redemption that mattered. But years later, when Kaylor was old and his silver fur had gone white with age, he made one final journey, back to the canyon where Celine had died. Lucien offered to come with him, but Kaylor refused. This was something he needed to do alone. The canyon looked different now. The burn marks from Naira's trap magic had faded. Grass and wildflowers grew where blood had soaked the earth. Time had softened the sharp edges of memory, but the weight of what had happened here remained. Kaylor stood where he'd held Celine for the last time and spoke to the wind. "I kept my promise, raised our son right, built something worth protecting. The empire's at peace, the bloodline secure. Everything you died for came true." The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of distant flowers. "I still love you. Never stopped, never will. And if there's anything after this, if there's any chance you're out there somewhere listening, I need you to know something." Kaylor's voice cracked, but he kept going. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For choosing pride over you. For not seeing the truth until it was too late. For not being there when Lucien was born. For making you die alone and afraid while I sat in my palace believing lies." He closed his eyes. "But I'm also grateful, because you loved me when I didn't deserve it. Saw something worth saving when I was too broken to save myself. And you gave me a son who's better than either of us ever were. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls gold and red. I'm tired, Celine, tired of living with this guilt, tired of wondering if you'd forgive me, tired of surviving instead of living. And I think, he opened his eyes, I think it's time to rest. Not die. Not yet. But maybe, finally, let go of the weight he'd been carrying since that terrible day in the throne room when he'd made the worst decision of his life. Maybe allow himself to believe that he'd done enough, that the empire was secure, that Lucien would rule well, that Celine's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Maybe permit himself a measure of peace. Kaelor placed a hand on the earth where she'd fallen and whispered one last truth. I'll see you again, someday. And when I do, I'll tell you everything. About our son, about the empire, about how your death changed everything. And maybe, if I'm lucky, you'll smile at me the way you used to, before I destroyed us. The wind shifted, bringing warmth instead of cold, and Kaelor could almost believe she'd heard him. He turned and walked out of the canyon for the last time, his steps lighter than they'd been in decades. Behind him, wildflowers bloomed where tragedy had once reigned. And somewhere in the distance, the Northern Moon Empire stood strong under a new king's rule, proof that even the worst mistakes could be transformed into something worth saving. That love, once broken, could still reshape the world. And that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future worthy of those you'd failed. Kaelor Draven had been many things. Tyrant, fool, destroyer of his own happiness. But in the end, he'd also been something else. A father who'd kept his promise. An alpha who'd learned that true strength came from admitting weakness. And a mate who'd spent every day since his greatest failure trying to honor the woman he'd loved and lost. It wasn't enough to undo what he'd done, but it was enough to matter. And sometimes, in a world built on violence and pride and impossible choices, that was the closest anyone got to salvation. The Empire remembered him as the Alpha King who'd nearly destroyed the bloodline and then spent his life rebuilding it. But Kaelor would always remember himself as the fool who'd had everything and threw it away because he was too afraid to trust the one person who truly loved him. That was his legacy, his burden, his truth. And he carried it all the way to his final breath, when he closed his eyes for the last time and whispered a name that had haunted him for decades. Celine. In the palace, Lucien felt the moment his father died, felt the bond snap like a cord pulled too tight. He stood on the balcony where his mother used to watch the sunrise and his father used to plan conquests, and he made a vow of his own. He would rule differently, better, would build on the foundation his parents had paid for in blood and sacrifice, would make sure their story, tragic and brutal and heartbreaking as it was, meant something. The Northern Moon Empire endured for generations after that, stronger and more unified than it had ever been. And every alpha who sat on the throne learned the story of Kaelor and Celine, learned what happened when pride mattered more than truth, when fear controlled decisions, when the greatest power in the world couldn't protect you from your own mistakes. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder, a warning. But it was also something else, proof that even from the deepest tragedy, even from the worst failures, something good could grow. If you were willing to pay the price, if you were brave enough to change, if you loved fiercely enough to transform your mistakes into meaning, that was the lesson. The truth. The final word on a story that had started with rejection and ended with redemption. Some wolves called it tragedy, others called it triumph. Lucien, standing on that balcony as the sun rose over an empire his parents had bled to create, called it something simpler. Love. In all its complicated, devastating, world-changing glory, and that, in the end, was enough.